Hey guys, thanks for clicking on Pro Talk Outdoors for another diving deep edition here. And this episode is going to be a little bit different, something that we have never done in the past. And much in our namesake, Pro Talk Outdoors, we're always getting a pro on to speak about something in the outdoors. Today is a little different. We've got a gentleman joining us by the name of Chris Allen. And Chris is somebody that you may or may not know, but here's the thing with Chris. You're not going to find him on social media. He's not going to be on Facebook. But what Chris is an outstanding woodsman. He is very, very accomplished in the outdoors. Lots of, just no-nonsense tactics. He gets down to the nuts and bolts of things and just really gets it when it comes to the outdoors. I can say that in our conversation with Chris, I learned a great deal about a wide range of topics when it comes to the outdoors. We don't just talk deer, we talk turkey, we talk waterfowl a little bit, we just talk habitat improvement, lots and lots of different things. But I guarantee you, if you listen to this podcast and part two, we've got a two-part segment that we recorded with Chris because there was so much information there, you're going to learn something. So sit back, relax, enjoy. This is part one of Diving Deep with Chris Allen. Hey guys, welcome to Pro Talk Outdoors, another edition here, and sitting here in Wyatt's living room again, and kind of just doing a little roundtable session. We're joined today by none other than Chris Allen. And you may not know who Chris Allen is. You may, I don't know. But from everything that I hear, Chris is a very accomplished outdoorsman and something that we're all going to want to listen to and something we could probably pick up from. What do you think, Wyatt?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris is one of my good friends, and we've been friends for a lot of years, and we spent some time in the woods, and I can tell you there's few people and definitely few families that are as good a woodsman as Chris and his family. His dad Bob and his brother Daniel. He's got an uncle, Steve. He's killed some really big deer, and all of them. They just get it, and that's kind of what we want to talk about. We want to talk about, what do you focus on, Chris? Starting a year, and that doesn't have to necessarily be with deer. I mean, you're an accomplished turkey hunter, waterfowl hunter, small game hunter. I mean, you do it all. And I know you guys are doing a big habitat improvement project over at your dad's this year. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. What all have you been up to this year?
Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to chat with you guys. You touched on something there earlier that's the key. If you want to know what really drives me, it's the family aspect that this hunting, fishing, outdoors thing really is. Have a father that has slept and breathed it for his entire life, and passed it on to Daniel and I. We really didn't have much of a choice.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, we were born and bred into it. Actually loved it at a very, very early age. Grew up squirrel hunting first and foremost. I mean, I can remember being a young fella before I even knew how to use a firearm, following behind Dad, scaring squirrels away more than actually helping him. But he just wanted us to be out there with him. And then you also mentioned my aunt or my uncles, cousins. We just have a good, tight, close-knit family that enjoys the same thing.
And that's hard to beat, man. I know I've hunted with your dad. I've hunted with your brother. From time to time with various different types of game. I mean, everybody in your family are just extremely accomplished.
Yep.
And that doesn't happen overnight. And I think a lot of times that happens from hard work and just being out there. How much time of the year do you spend, outside? Maybe not deer hunting, maybe not focusing on deer, but I mean just with wildlife in general. I mean, doing something out there either to help improve wildlife habitat, fishing, small game hunting, waterfowl hunting.
There's a time that you spend outside, and then there's the time that you spend thinking about it and wishing you were outside. I mean, that 90% of my time is spent probably thinking about it. and what that next move, I guess, is, whether it's preparing food plots, whether it's preparing habitat, whether it's just sitting, looking at weather data, information, trail cam pictures from years past, and trying to figure out what that next edge is, what that next move is. There's a lot of time spent, and my wife, God love her, didn't grow up in an outdoor type. I mean, they like to hike and spend time in the outdoors, but there's a difference between spending time in the outdoors and what we do.
Absolutely.
It's living in the outdoors. So yeah, I mean, there's been a learning curve there on her end, but she's actually hunting now, fishing now, loves it. I'd like to think that there's a little bit more of a choice on her end than there was with me and my brother.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's taken to it, and it wasn't until I married her that I actually realized how much time it actually takes. Because now there's two people, right?
Oh, dude, I can totally get that. I mean, because, yeah.
Now there's two people, and I wanted to spend time with her, but I kind of, and I needed to spend time with her, but I really needed to spend time outside, spend time hunting, spend time
fishing. Well, it's good
fishing.
for the soul. I mean, Kelly knows. I mean, there's a certain time of year where I'm just pissy.
Yeah.
It's usually from February to March where
she
I'm
knows
just,
your mind's somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm just going nuts because I'm like, gosh, it might be in the end of January through the first part of it. I'm like, it's too early to go out looking for sheds. It's everything's done. I'm just sitting around the house. It's too, it's cold. I don't want to be outside that
You're
much.
in that February funk.
Yeah, man, you're just in that funk. And yeah, no, I get that. Speaking of which, you guys just had a son. I'm sure you're. Congratulations on that, and
I appreciate
I'm
that.
sure you're looking really forward to getting him in the outdoors.
Yeah, and I can. It's really kind of interesting. I mean, it's amazing how a child has changed my. It hasn't changed my drive. It's changed my perception on how I want the next 5 years to look, how I want the next 15 years to look. It's not as much about me and killing the big buck or shooting a number of turkeys, multiple turkeys annually.
Because you normally travel to several different states.
Yeah,
and
I like
you
to
didn't.
beat their brains in. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I maybe hunted 10 times this year, turkey hunted, and that's crazy. I mean, that's crazy. 10 days is just stupid low.
Yeah, that's very low
speaking.
for you. Yeah.
I saw 5 birds get killed this year. I'm used to like 15 birds being killed under my
influences. Yeah.
Under
No.
my
Hey.
influences.
Yeah.
And that's what drove me. But I wanted to spend time with my son this year, and it was well worth it, obviously. And just this he's only 3 months old, and I can tell now just my feelings toward him, my love for him, is just totally going to change the next 5 years and how I view hunting in general. It's kind of weird saying that, but I'm looking forward to it.
No, it's not like you're going to quit.
I'm not going to quit. No.
You're just going to
can't do that.
Yeah, no.
Can't do that,
no.
but my focus has shifted. Once he becomes old enough to learn, once he becomes old enough to just spend time with me, my focus is going to be exactly what, really and truthfully, what my dad did with Daniel and I.
Right, yeah.
And just bringing him up, bringing Lucas up, my son, up how my dad brought my brother and I up. And I don't know the right way to do that, other than just spend time, just get to know Lucas, get to know how he interacts with the outside, what he enjoys, what he doesn't enjoy, and just take it from there,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I'm new at all this. This is the first time I've been a father, so I'm stoked. I'm looking forward to it.
Chris, that was that's interesting. You're talking about your son there, and you mentioned that your wife, who had not been, she was an outdoors person, so to speak, but had not been involved in hunting or fishing or anything, and you got her involved, and now you're talking about already your son, getting him involved. Has there been other people that you've gotten involved in the past? I know Wyatt and I have talked several times about different people that we have gotten involved in the outdoors, or even
maybe
when
as
we
adults,
started.
maybe as kids, yeah, whatever.
And hunter recruitment is a huge deal right now. I mean, as a matter of fact, we just recorded a podcast with Mark Drury, and we talked about how I think 5 years ago the number was 7% of people in the United States hunted, and now that's down to like 4% already, just over the last 5 years. So hunter recruitment's a huge deal. But has there been anybody else you've gotten involved in the outdoors? I mean, it sounds like you come from a hunting background yourself, and kind of curious as to how you have gotten others involved, and then talk a little bit about maybe how you got your wife involved. I mean, it wasn't just, hey, honey, let's go, and she went. So kind of talk about that a little bit.
It was kind of like that. She wanted to spend time with me for some reason, and I guess best place to spend time with me is where I was going to be anyways, and that's outside. But yeah, I mean, I haven't really gone out and actually searched for people to take hunting. It's usually, the way it usually looks is, I mean, I'm usually blabbing about shooting turkeys or deer or fishing something. That's usually what I'm talking about, because I really don't feel like talking about anything else. And just random people will be listening in on a conversation, and after the conversation they'll tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, do you have a spare spot in the blind sometime, or that turkey hunting thing sounds really cool. Is there any way that you'd ever want to take me sometime? Well, sure, yeah. Then conversations ensue, and that's usually how it works. It's obviously easiest to have conversations with folks of alike, folks that enjoy the outdoors, and that's just generally how it happens, I guess. I love taking new-time hunters. It's just a blast.
Oh, the look on their face. I mean, and just watch them experience stuff. I think that guys like us that spend a lot of time outside, we take for granted sometimes.
Right.
You know?
It
like, I mean, when a turkey gobbles, yeah, I mean, it fires me up. But, like, I overlooked that time when I heard my first turkey gobble, you know, or that first turkey come in. You know, I don't get as fired up about that now as I do with somebody else. And it's gratifying, man.
Uh-huh. You know that you could quite potentially be changing their lives.
Absolutely.
You really feel that way. You know that it's done that with you.
Yeah.
You feel like you're actually doing some good, and changing that individual's perception and how they, in fact, view the world as we know it. I'm trying not to get too deep here and sentimental.
I think that's fine. I mean, that is what it is. Yeah. I get it, dude. I mean, that's exactly what. Well, I can attest. You know what? I never waterfowl hunted, which I don't waterfowl hunt very much anymore. But I went through a phase where I waterfowl hunted quite a bit, and I probably would still if there was
waterfowl in southern Indiana.
Yeah. But your family and stuff. I mean, you guys were the first people to ever introduce me to that. I mean, and you guys did that with the kindness of your heart. You didn't have to do that,
right?
You know, I mean,
and you had ducks.
Well, I did have some ducks. Yeah, I did have some ducks. But I mean, still, I mean, because I wasn't even that. I was like, yeah, man, we got some ducks over here. Come over and shoot them.
Yep.
You're like, oh yeah, okay. Well,
you yelled,
you want to go?
Coming.
Yeah. Do you want to go with us? I was like, I don't know. But they convinced me to go. I really enjoyed it.
Another thing that's really interesting about the whole new hunter thing, and especially with turkeys, and I mean even waterfowl, but turkeys more so than anything, just because turkeys are so much more on top of their game, I feel, than waterfowl. Some of the other critters that you might take a first-time hunter on, and it just seems like, you know how you felt the first 2 or 3 birds that you just how amped up you were.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying that now that we've killed 50 birds apiece that it's not there, that you don't get that burning desire and just that fired upness that you used to. But there's a new element when you have a first-time hunter or second-time hunter. You don't know what they're going to do. You don't know if they're going to miss.
Yeah.
And I mean the apprehension, I guess, and just the level of excitement is there more so than when you're sitting there hunting by yourself.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%, because now, I mean, mostly when I go turkey hunting, I don't care if I end up killing one. I just want to call one in.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's the fun part of turkey hunting. You know, I mean, it's not necessarily the part of pulling the trigger that's so much fun, but
It's-
it is a lot of
it's
fun when
the
you got
dance.
somebody else there. Yeah, it's the
the
dance,
dance.
exactly.
Playing the game one more time.
Yep, exactly,
That's
and that's probably why we end up taking so many people out.
Yep.
Year after year. I hunted this year with Daniel, your brother.
Mhm.
I mean, because I was having a tough time on farms that we were on, and I hunted with him a couple different times on some of your all's farms, and would have hunted with you, but you were out of town. A few times. We all three would have went.
I was out of town turkey hunting.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one more bird, one more. You just feel that much more accomplished. It seems like it's a mano thing. You want to beat one more bird. You're on his turf. You're in his where he lives, and you're beating him at his game, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean we're
defying
defying nature because I mean a gobbler gobbles to have hens come to him.
Yeah.
And we're over there sounding like a hen trying to get him to come to us. Yeah,
it's not a killing thing. There's so many people that think it's just a killing thing, but it's so much more deep than that.
Absolutely.
That turkey hunting thing.
It's a tough one to shake.
If there was one thing to pick, it'd be them. It'd be those thunder chickens.
Well, that was going to actually be my next question. What is your I don't know that we've ever talked about this. What's your favorite thing to pursue? But I guess it's turkeys.
Turkeys, no doubt, hands down.
Yeah. Where's whitetail fall in the mix?
Depends on how cooperative they're being. Whitetail to me, can be more frustrating at times, which makes you feel that much more accomplished.
When it happens.
When you actually set one down. I like waterfowl hunting a lot when it's right. Being a Southern Indiana waterfowl hunter is frustrating as all get out.
Once a decade.
And I should not have spent the thousands of dollars on decoys and a duck boat and a dog, XYZ. I'd have probably been better off spending that money buying property and managing it for whitetails and turkeys. But I just like that time of the year, the winter of the year. Things are changing. Just witnessing. It seems like the very, very few times that waterfowl hunt is right. It's just it can't be beat.
Yeah,
it really can't.
I've been on a couple right ones, and it is pretty unbelievable.
When you have thousands of them circling overhead, I mean, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah,
it's the most amazing thing.
Yeah, well, and I think the camaraderie with turkey hunting and waterfowl really comes into play a lot more than it does with whitetails.
It's different. It's definitely different. I mean, the whitetail thing can be a couple guys sitting in a blind waiting, but there's not much interaction. You got to be quiet. There's just so much more interaction. Camaraderie is the word you use, and that's the right word. When you're duck hunting, for sure.
Yeah.
And turkey hunting more so than with whitetail, and that's probably why I'd probably rate waterfowl again when it's right. Number 2, right after shooting turkeys.
Well, and don't let this guy fool you. This dude knows how to kill some big deer. I've witnessed it. He shot one of my big deer one year.
Yeah.
And which I wasn't upset about. I mean, that was the plan.
Which one? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, over at Carol's. Yeah.
I do remember that.
Yeah. But he killed. Well, tell it, Chris. You were in. Where were you working?
I was out of town. I forget where I was living. I've lived in 4 different states, moved 7 different times with work.
I think you were in Illinois, maybe.
Yeah, I was in Illinois.
Maybe.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It was 2012, right? It was a drought year.
Yeah, I think
it
was
2012.
2012.
So I had just moved to Ohio. I just moved to Ohio and didn't know anybody, didn't have any place to hunt.
Okay.
And didn't have any time to scout down home in southern Indiana, and I guess I was complaining about that and might have overheard some of that complaining and had that buck. He actually had a good picture of him in velvet.
Yeah, had several good pictures of him. He was a real regular in velvet, and then he kind of got a little shaky there once he dropped. I think he moved over to the neighbors, but it was November the 5th. I'll never forget that date.
Yep, November the 5th, that shining day that you got to be in a tree. Doesn't matter what's going on in your life, you need to be in a tree. Yeah, I mean, it was...
You shot him early in the afternoon now. Different deer. No, this was an 8.
It was early. I think I hunted that morning. You kind of told me just, this is the woods, go find a tree, climb up in it.
Yep.
And I think I had hunted that morning and didn't see very much movement at all, and relocated to an area that looked a little bit more ruddy, I guess. Hopped up in a tree, and heck, it wasn't an hour after I'd been in a tree. It was early afternoon, I think, was when.
I saw Big Louie, which was he was the biggest 8-pointer I've ever seen to this day. He was probably 170-inch 8-pointer. He was just stupid big. That's the same year I killed that deer. That's a big 8-pointer.
No
He
doubt.
made him look stupid.
No doubt.
Small. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Big Louie was a giant. We saw him 3 times. I guess I saw him twice. My dad saw him once. And it was the first time that I'd seen him. I saw him at 3:33 that afternoon, and you'd shot that deer right before that.
Right.
Or right around that time.
Right. I remember.
It was before you had called me.
I remember getting a text from you saying that you had just seen him.
Yep.
And I think the next text was me shooting a picture of the one,
Yeah,
the one that I had shot.
I mean,
yeah.
solid 8-pointer. I mean, upper 30s. I
Yeah,
mean, nice
yeah.
deer. Really
Probably
nice
could have
deer.
used another year, but
Well, who cares?
one of the very few hunts I was going to get to go on that year, so.
He was a good one, man. Yeah, he was running with a good one all summer, too. I don't know whatever ended up happening to that deer.
Yeah.
But now we, actually, that property where Chris shot that, they're leasing the neighboring property right next to it.
Yep, the
so-
property that deer came out of, believe it or not.
Yep, so it's kind of, it's interesting. We've got a good, which that kind of goes back to a podcast we were talking about before. It's kind of knowing your neighbors and working together with your neighbors. We have a really good working relationship, I think, as far as whitetails and stuff go over there.
No doubt.
We tell each other what's going on and what's happening, and it
share
benefits both of us.
pictures here and there, and
Yep.
all got a pretty good tally inventory of what we got running around, and
Yeah, and we work together on which ones, hey, do we think this one's a shooter this year? Do we think this one's not? Hey, we're not going to shoot this deer. Hey, whatever. I mean, we...
yeah, and from the way it sounds here, 4 or 5 years ago, before we had that property, that was kind of a no-go. I mean,
absolutely.
The folks that had that lease. I mean, I'm not dissing on guys that like to go in and shoot deer for meat and just shoot deer. I mean, to each their own. But they had the people that were in on that lease prior to us basically shot everything that was brown and had floppy ears. And there was
regardless of the amount of tags.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it was getting bad over there when you guys started leasing. But think about in the last, what's it been, 4 years you guys have been over there? This will be year number 5 or year number 4?
I think this is the 4th year.
Think about how things have progressed in that period of time. The deer that we're seeing consistently.
We went from having just a shooter or two that we knew of.
How many did we have last year that we all shared?
There were every bit of 6 that we got pictures of that.
At a minimum of 6.
At minimum of 6 that we deemed that were mature bucks. I mean, 4
that
years
were
old,
that were,
4
and
a
there
half
were
years old.
several 3-year-olds that ought to be awful.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the time they start putting bone on here in about another month.
Yeah.
Driving around, looking in the bean fields, trying to shoo off all the other guys that'll be gawking on our deer. But I shouldn't say that either. They're not our deer. But
I
you know
what
I mean.
Saying. Yeah, we've got a few problem issues with people over in that area.
Yeah, there should be 7, 8 different bucks that I'm looking forward to seeing.
Yep. Me too, man. I'm looking for, and that's not even our primary farm that we hunt, which makes it even nicer having you guys over there. Because you guys kind of help keep an eye on things for us. I mean, if you see anything weird going on or anything, and like I said, occasionally we have some issues with some weird stuff going on over in that area, so it works out really well. I mean, and we do the same for you guys. If we see somebody parked that looks like a weird vehicle or something, we get hold of somebody and things like that. So tell us about the real big deer you shot.
It was luck.
How big was he? What did he gross that out?
He gross, total 193 inches.
Yeah.
Total 193 inches. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I had all kinds of documentation on this deer and knew where he was, knew where he was sleeping, knew his every move, and just beat him. That's not what it was. We actually we got access to finally deer hunt a property that we had squirrel hunted and turkey hunted on for 3-4 years. So we had some history with the property, knew it fairly well, and had heard that there was a really darn good buck in the area, 2 or 3 really really good bucks, and we just so happened to be squirrel hunting. My dad and I. It would have been early September, mid-September, I believe, right when those acorns start to drop. The squirrels had kind of moved off of hickories a little bit.
Yeah.
And we're chewing on white oaks. But this woods, this one particular woods, was pretty much a beech grove. I mean, what a deer hunter would almost consider trash property.
Absolutely, yeah.
Would totally stray away from hunting a block of timber like this one. But there was really, really thick, like it was actually a plantation at some point. You could tell that the trees were in rows. There was real thick undergrowth.
Yeah.
Bedroom, basically. It was a bedroom. And we were, again, squirrel hunting and found this grove of, I call it a grove. It wasn't even a grove. There was just a sprig of probably 2 or 3 white oaks and I believe a red oak or 2, and they all were loaded and they all were dropping at the same time. And again, no forage anywhere else. It's a beech grove. Not
Right.
really much else in there for deer to really key on. And I noticed, we shot a couple squirrels in there, in those oak trees, but also noticed that it was just pulverized. The deer had been using it hard. And I really, really liked the lay of the land. There were 2 different creeks that were feeding into a main creek, and there were ridges in between those 2 creeks. It was just a real good kind of a travel corridor type spot. And I looked at Dad after shooting those squirrels and picking them up, and I said, "We're gonna kill deer here." I didn't say we were gonna kill a monster buck. I said, "But this is a good spot. This is just a heck of an ambush spot, especially with prevailing northerly, northwesterly type winds."
Yeah.
The way that we would access the property was just perfect. And I said, I told Dad, I said, "We got to be in here opening weekend. We got to be in here opening weekend, middle or early October, when those deer are 100%. If there's any deer anywhere in this area, in this block of woods, they're gonna hit these. They're gonna hit these oak trees in the afternoon." And I was actually moving back home that weekend. Fast forward into October, very first hunt of the year. Was pretty amped up. I figured I was gonna stick an arrow in something. Dad had actually shot a doe that night after I shot the buck, but just by luck, it was a really good moon phase. It was that blood red moon. I don't know if you guys remember. It was 2014. That blood red moon. I mean, it was just a gorgeous, big, huge moon. Folks that are real big on biblical Jewish calendar were talking about the blood red moon. Had heard reports of folks talking about deer already fighting in the early October time frame.
We also had like a little cold front right then.
We had a good cold front.
That's what I was thinking.
We had a good, like, so like all the stars,
stars
were kind
aligned.
of, they were.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a northwest wind that night. The wind was in my face, 100% in my face, walking in. Was excited just because of that. I knew that there was a good opportunity to shoot a deer, period. So snuck in, got in quiet. I knew exactly how I needed to get in there and get my climber up. And got up, settled in, and heck, I wasn't in the tree for an hour. Probably wasn't even an hour. And the first deer I saw, first hunt of the year, first deer I saw him poke his head out of that plantation area. Pretty sketchy wind. I mean, he was kind of quartering downwind of me, but the way that wind was blowing was every bit of 100 yards from him. That scent cone was just exactly where it needed to be.
Yeah.
And I knew
we'll
where he
talk
was
about
coming.
that here in a minute.
I knew where he was coming. He was coming to chew on some oaks. He got to chew on a rage instead. But he was quartering into the wind just perfect. Coming in, started popping some of those oaks. He was moving pretty quick. I don't know if I still to this day don't know if he had actually caught wind of something else, or even heck, he might even caught wind of me. It didn't really make sense for him to kind of come my way after getting wind of me, but he was kind of moving abruptly. And I mean, I saw him at 150 yards, saw him all the way through the woods pretty good. He was real narrow deer. So I looked at him through the binoculars and said, "Hey, it's a nice deer, pretty darn nice deer." And he turned sideways, and I saw tines. he's a tall deer. I'm gonna shoot him, and could tell by the way he was walking. He was an older one. I mean, I got a good side profile image of him, and from that point, I didn't look at any more rack. Said, I know
Probably a good thing.
I know I'm gonna shoot this buck, and finally got him to stop. He was quartering to me a little bit, just the way that the land was laying. He was quartering to me and downhill a little bit, but I knew it was my last opportunity, so I went ahead and I had ranged him at 35 yards, so shot him for 30. Hit him pretty good, and he kind of ran at me a little bit and stopped. It was just so thick. I still, at that point in time, I didn't understand and know exactly how big he was until the following morning. I mean, he stood under me for maybe, it felt like a half hour, but it was probably more like 2 minutes, and kind of eased his way off a little bit.
Yeah.
Let him do his thing and ease his way off, and something just didn't seem right, so we didn't go in until the next morning.
Well, I mean, probably. Did you hit him in the liver?
I hit him. I mean, looking at a target, I 10-ringed him.
Yeah.
But the way he was facing me and quartering downhill, what ended up happening is it 10-ringed and exited out low and back because he was quartering to me.
Right.
Actually, I told a little bit of a lie earlier. He was right under me for, again, a couple minutes, and the way he worked his way off real slowly, something just didn't seem right. I knew that I had hit him good. A deer that I had hit that well should have expired within a couple minutes, really and truthfully.
Yeah. Well, or seconds even.
After he finally left and I lost sight of him, I got down. There's blood all over the place.
Yeah.
Red blood. I mean, heart blood. I knew that I had just smoked him, and I started easing up through the woods and actually jumped the sucker. He was bedded down maybe 100 yards from me, and I jumped him. Not going to lie about that.
Well, I mean, but you know what, though? That's a good lesson, and that's a lesson that you won't forget.
It was
Anybody
a lesson
that was with
that
you.
I will not. I mean, if there's any kind of question at all, and the deer after you hit it is acting strange, isn't acting right,
Give him
if you
time.
think that you 10-ring that deer, and he doesn't die within 5 minutes, and you got sight of him, something's going on.
Well, and there's so many things. I mean, unless you have a video camera on you and you can watch it back, and even still, I mean, there's so many things that can happen in that split second. That, you know, I mean, the deer could have, which in that case it didn't. But
Right.
I mean, in a normal
Right.
case, I mean, a deer can, you know, take an extra step. You hit it back a little bit. You
Right.
know, I mean, swing its head around, whatever.
And looking back, I mean, it was when I was playing it through in my mind. That's the only thing that, and obviously after recovering the deer and seeing how that arrow went through that deer, it's
Right.
obvious that's what happened.
Yeah.
It just what I thought was a 10-ring, an excellent shot, was not the case. But again, when I jumped him, he was sideways, going away. You know how bucks look going away. They look twice as big as they are. I about puked because I saw nothing but tines, and I saw that deer's profile from
that
the
thing's
right.
stupid, man.
And I did not get much sleep
Dave, you've
that
never
night.
seen him. You need to see him.
I did not get much sleep that night, but I backed out way out and around to not get anywhere as close to where that deer could have gone. And we went back in the next morning and recovered him pretty quick. I mean, he had only got another 100 yards from where I'd actually jumped him. Pretty cool story. It very, very few times do you have that many learning experiences and still recover the deer.
Yeah.
Especially deer like that.
Yeah.
So very, very thankful that it ended up that way.
Well, he was a heck of a deer, and I know it's been a few years, and I've told you several times, but I mean, congratulations again, dude.
Appreciate it.
I mean, that's a buck of a lifetime. Many lifetimes.
I've come to terms with not ever seeing a deer like that ever again, let alone sticking an arrow in one.
Yeah, well, that's good, but you're not done hunting.
That's a fact.
Yeah, I hear people say that all the time, don't you? If I ever killed a deer that big, I think I'd hang it up. How could you?
No.
I don't understand. I don't understand that. I don't understand that. So okay, so you were talking about the deer was he was just kind of starting to quarter into that wind, and you said that wind was perfect.
Right.
but it was really close to the deer. I think a lot of things that we read and like kind of the thought process that we've been told by a lot of people is you want the wind blowing the opposite direction of the deer, blowing whether if you anticipate the deer to come behind you, or if you're anticipating the deer to come out from in front of you, you want the wind hitting you in the face. I haven't always. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about this.
We definitely have.
I haven't always found that to be true. I think sometimes those bucks want to quarter into the wind instead of walk with the wind at their back, especially these high pressure areas. I think a lot of times you almost have to have that marginal wind for it to actually be a perfect wind.
Yep.
Now you have to have a sustained heavier wind, or it's going to swirl.
It's going to swirl. That's correct. That all goes into it. I got a challenge for everybody, anybody and everybody that's listening to this next year, this next fall. Don't care how much time you spend in the tree, but the time that you spend in the tree, if and when you see a deer, if and when you see a buck in particular, more particular that 3.5 plus age range, document the wind, document which way he's going.
Yep.
And by the end of the year, I almost guarantee you that 75, maybe as much as 90% of those deer have the wind, if not totally in their face,
quartering toward
them, so that they have an. I've learned so much, whether it's deer or ducks or turkeys. I mean, you got to try to think like a deer or a duck or a turkey.
Yep.
Think about what's going through their brain. They're out there in the
They're
wild,
trying to survive
24/7, 365. There's a reason that a 4.5, 5.5-year-old mature buck is that old, because he knows what's out there, and he's going to use his senses to know what's out there.
Yeah, and his biggest defense is his nose.
That's a fact. So if there's anything that people should gather by listening to this rant, half hour, however long we've talked, try to be thinking about what your query is thinking. Try to be thinking about the triggers that you're trying to pull to get that turkey in or to get that deer in. I mean, that's it. And then from that information that you gather, again, thinking from the perspective of the animal, that's ultimately going to tell you what to do. There's been it was extremely hard for me to switch that mindset. Wind at your face. Waterfowlers obviously want the wind at their back, but deer hunters want that wind at their face. It's extremely hard to have that mindset for 10, 15, 20 years and then totally switch it.
It absolutely is. I mean, because I went through that a few years ago, and it was, it is so tough because you feel like it's like, oh man, I'm taking too big a risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in reality, and in certain areas and in certain situations, like we were talking earlier, low wind speeds. You get down in a lower area, over a hill, something like that. Yeah, you are taking too big a risk. The conditions have to be right.
Yep.
But if the conditions are right, say you've got winds over 7 or 8 miles an hour and they're consistent, that's the time to do that.
Right. No doubt.
That's the time to kind of take your risk. It's not really a risk because, I mean, if the deer are using a specific trailer coming out of a specific bedding area or what have you, then they're gonna. You're not gonna set up right where the wind's blowing to them. We're not saying that, but you have to set up to where that wind's quartering toward them.
Right. That's the biggest thing for sure.
Yeah.
And you always got to keep in mind that you might only get one shot at this sucker.
Yep.
You might only get one shot at this deer, and if he gets a nose full, somebody else in the next county might end up having pictures on Facebook of your deer.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's happened to me before.
Well,
it's not
it's
a very
happened
good
to all
feeling.
of us, yeah.
But
yeah.
It's a good feeling. However, having a good idea where a deer is, a big buck in particular, and knowing that you're taking a risk, a calculated risk, and going in there, getting in a tree, and him doing exactly what you think he's going to do.
Well,
that is cool.
Yes.
That is cool. And that there have been multiple times since I learned that lesson with that big buck. That was the initial lesson. There have been multiple times that's happened, and it is extremely rewarding. There's been some flub ups. Yeah, I've screwed up some deer since then. But it is quite rewarding to think that you know what a deer's going to do, to think that on this particular wind, on this particular cold front, that this buck lives here and he's going to take this particular path right under my tree, and then ultimately stick an arrow in him. That's the goal.
Well, I mean, you get to the point where you're dialing it in to where you're saying, okay, well, this is where that deer beds. With an east wind, he's going to move this way.
Yeah.
With a west wind, he's going to move this way. And with
Yep.
a south wind, he's probably going to be, and then, I mean, it's just yes, you're taking a risk, but you're also, the time that you're spending in the tree is a lot more valuable, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there comes a point in time that you say that you need a particular wind, a northwest wind, and if it's a north wind, it's a no-go. It's an absolute no-go. You need a northwest to a west wind, and you can hunt this spot. You think the deer's going to do it? It just becomes more calculated, I guess.
It absolutely does. Well, and I mean, it even goes to the point where, like I was saying, on an east wind, he's going to go this trail, or in a west wind, he's going to go that trail. He might not, because he might bed in a different area with a completely
That's
opposite
correct.
wind. I mean, and I know we've had this conversation numerous times together. It's those deer. I mean, they depend so much on their senses and their nose.
And it depends on the time of the year too.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and the food and everything else.
I mean, all that comes full circle. The reason that I shot that big buck is because he was keying on what they key on in early October: food.
Yeah.
That deer
Acorns, white oaks.
that would not have been the case 1st of November.
No.
I'm not going to say there's no way I wouldn't have shot that deer then, because there might have been does in there, but it just depends on the time of the year, depends on what their trigger is. I mentioned that earlier. Early October, the trigger is acorns or persimmons or food plot, whatever. That switches up big time.
Toward the end of October,
come
1st of
Halloween.
November, yeah.
That pre-rut phase, and then changes that much more drastically
In late season.
two more weeks.
Yeah.
When they're looking for girls, when scrapes aren't even worth sitting over, and then switches yet again latter part of November and early December, when things start cooling down quite a bit.
So something I took away from you talking about killing that big deer, and I know you've done this with a lot more deer than just that big deer, but we use it as an example. That is good woodsmanship, in my opinion. I think that's something that's really lacking with hunters. And I mean, I think we're all guilty of it to some capacity. Is we're not out there. We're relying too much on our trail cameras. We're relying, too much on information that we're seeing on the internet or on TV.
Right.
We're not out there actually living it. You were out squirrel hunting, noticed an area that you said, I think this is going to be a place to shoot a deer of some sort, and it turned out that it was a really big deer. What are things that you think people can do to maybe be better woodsmen? What are things that you look for when you're in the woods? Because to me, I mean, you can go with different people. And you can almost instantly tell if they're a good woodsman by the way that they walk around, by the things that they notice.
Right,
I mean, you just have that sense. What are things? And I think that you're a great woodsman. I mean, and that's probably not praising you high enough by saying that you're a great woodsman. You're one of the best that I've ever spent time with in the woods. What are things that when you step into the woods and say you're headed to a tree stand or you're squirrel hunting or whatever, maybe you're not scouting for deer, quote unquote scouting for deer, but what are things that you're looking for to better your success in the fall?
Well, we touched on it earlier. Growing up in an outdoor household with an outdoorsman type father, my dad taught hunter education, taught shooting sports, was very big, and he was a 4-H extension agent. So we grew up doing 4-H projects. One project that was non-negotiable was forestry. Dad made Daniel and I learn our trees.
Well, that's a huge thing, and cause I'm pretty decent with trees and stuff. I'm not phenomenal.
I used to know a lot more than I do now. I mean, the only trees that I know now are trees that I'm going to kill a squirrel or a deer out of.
Yeah.
But where was I going with this? It's just spending time outside. I'll never forget. You mentioned the walking in the woods, how you can tell if somebody's a woodsman or not. I'll never forget. I mean, the way that I learned how to walk quietly in the woods was
Your
to follow,
dad?
literally follow in my dad's footsteps. And everybody might think all cutesy wootsy.
Did your
but
dad give you the look like my dad would give me the
he
look?
didn't look. He didn't look, but I could tell when I stepped on a twig and spooked a squirrel off. The hair on the back of his neck would stand up. He would shrug his shoulders. And sometimes he'd kind of look over and just give me that
Just give
glance.
you the glare.
I mean, he didn't even have to say
I
a
know.
word. Half the time, he didn't even have to look at me. I just sit down and wait for him to go ahead and continue on up and kill the squirrel because I'd almost totally screwed the pooch. But yeah, I might not use that same tactic with my son Lucas, but there might be a squirrel or two that I might have that similar reaction. But literally following in the footsteps of somebody else is a good way to learn, especially if it's somebody that's a good woodsman. My wife hasn't hunted before, or hadn't hunted before prior to me meeting her, and she is, as of now, a pretty darn good woodsman.
Yeah.
Because I told her at the get-go, when we started squirrel hunting, we started turkey hunting and then squirrel hunting a little bit, I told her to literally step where I step. And in doing that, I mean, she's obviously going to look with her eyes down where she's going to step. She notices where I step. She notices the kind of places that I step.
Right.
The bare areas, the big rock areas. I migrate to creeks because creeks can either be your worst enemy or your friend when it comes to stealthing around.
Mm-hmm.
And those are things that you don't just expect a new hunter to learn. I mean, you can have conversations about that kind of stuff. It doesn't always have to be the cold shoulder and the hair on the back of somebody else's neck that tells you whether or not you're making too much noise or doing what you need to be doing in the woods. But I mean, a little guy, you definitely can have those conversations and kind of more or less just teach them how to be quiet in the woods.
Well, and I think the woodsmanship in general, I mean, I think that kind of separates people that are good hunters and people that are great hunters.
Yeah.
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 And just being able to know the sign and know how to move through the woods properly, know what your wind's doing, what your thermals are doing.
Right.
Things of that nature. I mean, it really separates the men from the boys, I guess, in some regards.
Right. We could talk for hours about the different aspects of woodsmanship. We could do another podcast on that sometime.
Oh yeah,
I mean, there's so much to it. There's so much to it. Depends on the year, depends on the season, and how you're gonna sneak up to that quarry or sneak into the tree stand. What you mentioned earlier about what goes through my brain when I'm verbal, when I'm going into a tree stand, and sometimes there are stands that you just choose not to hunt.
Yeah.
Because of wind. Depends on where you think.
Because of
access is huge.
Oh,
I mean,
my
I've
gosh.
learned that with our lease.
Yeah.
It's frustrating that there's only two accesses to that place, and both of them are on the east side of the property.
Mm-hmm.
It just it makes it frustrating.
Oh,
It makes
I know,
it hard.
I know.
And knowing good and well that you could be blowing deer out. Sometimes you just choose to go ahead and do it because it's in the middle of November and you got to do it.
Well, yeah, it's a risk and reward type thing. Yeah.
But there's actually tactics you can use during that time.
Something I do a lot when I know my access is a little bit screwy, and especially like in the afternoons or something like that, I'll yelp like a turkey and go around and I'll scratch in the leaves, stuff like that, just with my foot. Especially like if I'm in some thick type stuff, where I don't think that they can visually see me, or I'm coming around a ridge or something like. That's something that I do all the time, and I know there's been people with me and they're like, "What in the world are you doing? You're deer hunting."
Yeah.
But I mean, that's something that deer hear constantly in the woods.
Have you ever visibly seen a deer and done that, and had a deer that you thought might see you or might be spooky, and done that, and it actually worked out to your favor?
I've gotten awful close to deer. I mean, I've gotten within 10, 15, 20 yards of
Right.
deer. Not necessarily a lot of times because it was kind of that element of surprise, right?
Right.
I come like right over top of a ridge, or they come right over top of a ridge, or something of that nature. But I know that they heard me,
Right.
and they thought that I was a turkey.
Right. They hear everything.
Because in just the days that I'm doing it, I'm not doing it when it's windier than crap.
Right.
And I feel like I can slip in, or when it's real wet or something like that.
Right.
That's not what I'm doing. I'm doing it on those days where it's calm and it's crunchy, and I'm almost, I know this sounds probably stupid to a lot of people, but I'm almost being obnoxiously loud, sounding like another animal, so it's not like I'm slipping in as a deer hunter.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, I do the same thing. A deer hunter walks to his tree stand. He doesn't stop. How many times do you hear a deer do that?
Never.
You don't.
Yeah. You ever walk like heel to toe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Like a deer walks and then stop, and then
there are times that the right call is, or not the right call, like turkey call, but the right choice to make is to not try to be quiet. Is to actually try to sound like a deer. Try to sound maybe not like a herd of deer, but just taking a few steps here and there and stopping and pausing, rummaging around like a deer might do, and then progress forward. I mean, slowly. I'm talking taking
very slow.
Taking an hour and a half, not trying to beat daylight, knowing what you're up against, knowing that you're going to be walking past deer, and getting there at daylight, and maybe it takes you an hour and a half to get into your stand a half mile away. Sometimes that's what you got to do.
Yeah, and I do that sometimes. I'll go in at right after the sun comes up, on certain stands, certain places at certain times of year, usually during the rut, when I feel like, okay, I can slip in here and be a lot less because I can glass my way in.
Yep.
I can get in a tree. I'm still going to have an opportunity as the day goes on.
Yep.
I can go really easy, or I can go, like you were saying, sound like a deer, sound like a turkey, whatever.
Right.
But get into the stand without actually disturbing as much stuff as I would if I walked in an hour before daylight with a flashlight blazing and breaking twigs and sticks and everything else.
Right, and that I find that more times than not. That's kind of a rut scenario. I mean, there's a lot of noise in the woods. There's a lot of deer movement, and in my opinion, you can get away with a lot more that time of the year.
Well, you can with everything
if you sound like a deer.
Yep.
I mean, use your senses as well. You got to be a predator. I mean, that's what we're doing. So ease into your spots, be listening. If you hear that deer are rummaging around, chasing around, use that to your advantage. Wait till they get to moving, and then you can move too.
Mm-hmm.
If there are deer that sound like they're heading to your stand, whoa up.
Yeah.
Call it off for now.
Yep.
You don't know if that's a doe, little fawn, or if that's the buck you're hunting.
Well, and in the rut too,
it.
I mean, you have, even with a bow, I mean, we're generally bow hunters. Not that we don't gun hunt at all, but as a whole, I would consider us bow hunters.
It does something for a guy to blast the heck out of a deer with a shotgun. It just does something for a guy. Haven't done it in years, but
but even with a bow being pinned up next to a tree, I mean, at the right time of year in the rut, man, it's not that hard to kill a deer.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, it's not at the right time of year. Now, I mean, that's not catching a bunch of deer feeding. I mean, we're talking about when they're seeking, when they're chasing. Those bucks have other things on their mind. I mean, that's when you can get away with stuff. So if you're hearing deer come to you, pin up next to a tree, see what happens. Knock an arrow.
That's exactly right.
I mean, don't be like, oh God, I got to get in my stand to go run into your stand.
You are hunting.
Yeah, you're hunting from the second you get out of your truck.
That's a fact.
And in some people's cases, while they're in their truck. not our case, but But the second you get out of the truck or whatever, and you're walking your way in the woods, be a hunter. Yeah, don't be a hunter when you're 20 foot up. Be a hunter the whole way in and the whole way out.
That's exactly
It's something
right.
that I notice a lot of people do, just taking people. They'll try to go in really easy, like say in the evening. They'll try to go in real easy. And then it'll get dark. They don't shoot anything. They climb
Right.
down, make all kinds of racket, blaze out of the woods, flashlights and breaking sticks and have no care. But they have, what they're not thinking about is, what did that do for tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
What did that do for next weekend?
Yep.
When I come back in here, I always try to go in as quiet as I can and come out as quiet as I can. Even like in the summer and stuff, like I try to slip around. And when you're looking for a deer that you've shot,
Yep.
when you're blood
Yep.
trailing one, I always try to be quiet. And I'm whispering, if I've got friends with me, I'm not talking to the top of my lungs, and
Right.
because you never know. I mean, weird stuff happens. It's like that deer that you shot. You're like, man, I think I 10-ringed him, but
Yep.
he didn't die.
I mean, I think deer hunters. I know that I've fallen into this trap in my early deer hunting years. That like you said earlier, you just got to get to that tree.
Oh, we've all fallen into that trap.
You want to get to the tree, but dagnabbit, do you do that when you're turkey hunting? Do you have
No.
a spot that you have X'd out and run to that spot? Doesn't matter how many turkey you blow out going in. I got to get to my spot. No,
Yeah.
that's stupid. You're hunting. You're hunting the entire time that you're out there.
Well, that's true. Very
the
true.
turkey I killed in Indiana this year is a prime example. I wanted to get to that spot because there was history in a spot that I was planning on hunting, but the turkeys beat me to it. So you change up plans and get a little bit fancy, get a little bit out of your comfort zone, try some new things, and
It works.
it works.
I mean, it does, man. That's a very good point. You don't always have to be in that stand to be a hunter. I mean, gosh, I don't know. Well,
How many deer have you shot on the ground?
shot that one on the ground with a bow. That's one. Let's see here. Kelly killed one of these deer. Which one? That one. That deer was kind of weird, man. We saw him. It was super windy. We were hunting a thicket, and it was like 30, 40 mile an hour winds that morning. And we sat there till about 9. I said, I don't think it's happening up here. We were up on top of a hill. I said, I think we need to set on the break of the hill. Just because of the wind. They generally,
Right.
gravitate to those lower areas. So we sat down, and I was blown out. I mean, it was like November 30th or something. I'd been running hard. And so I kind of like leaned back on my backpack, and next thing I know, I hear a deer, and I just lean my head back like this. And I see this deer walk like 20 yards behind us. And he was kind of, catty going down this ridge, and there's always a trail that they cross on. And so we let him get out of the way. I grabbed her. I took a grunt call and a bleak can, and we ran around. We got on the shelf below and ran around. All right, and the whole time I'm sitting there going, bruh, 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 like a chase. I mean, that's exactly what you were
Right.
talking about. I was blowing that grunt call like we were chasing. Dude, we pulled up, set up on this house rock. Here come this deer. Like right to that sound of that noise. I mean, and I mean, it was just silly. I mean, that was one of those situations that totally worked. But that one was killed off the ground. I shot that one on the end off the ground.
I know that
I
there's
think that's
been.
it.
I know that
I think
there's
that's all
been
here in the
a
house.
couple circumstances that.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had out of the ordinary type.
That deer was on the ground. It's
out of
kinda
ordinary
similar.
type hunts where you've been walking in or walking around looking for somebody else's deer and had a nice buck come up, and
Yeah.
you just never know.
No, you don't. Yeah,
moral
you
of
always
the
got to be on
story-
your toes.
Moral of the story: you don't got to be in a tree.
Yes, exactly. And we've had a lot of other instances, similar to that maybe didn't work out with one of us killing a deer. But I mean, it was either one because the shot or something just didn't present itself in the way that we thought it was going to,
Right.
or it was a deer that we didn't want to shoot. Actually, that deer right there in the middle, that big 8, I missed him the week before on the ground. Slipped up on him. He was with a doe.
Right.
And I'd been hunting in a tree stand, and he slipped around edge of the hill and bedded down with him. I could just see the top of his rack.
Right.
And I slipped around. I went like super wide, probably a mile or so walk around, and like came in on the opposite side. And him and that doe had just got up, and I was just, I was there, and I ended up hitting a limb when I shot. But I mean, still similar. That could have easily been a deer that I killed off the ground, in that scenario.
Now that I stop and think about it, I've probably seen more shooter bucks, more mature bucks, and been within shooting range of those bucks with a squirrel rifle in my hand.
Yeah.
What's that tell you?
Yeah. Let Dave talk.
Yeah, I don't really need
You've
to
been kinda
talk. I mean,
quiet.
I'm just kind of going to school right here, guys. This is some phenomenal stuff right here. Man, I'm just kind of blown away, Chris. It's just some good information, and but I can tell this already. We've actually been on this for about an hour here, and I think we need to have Chris back on again at some point.
Dude, I can keep rolling.
that's
I know.
that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think we
Yeah.
really need to. Would you be willing to come back on, Chris, and talk about just some other stuff?
For sure. That'd be my pleasure.
Well, I guess just for the sake of the this podcast. I guess we'll go ahead and get ready to close her out. But Wyatt, you got any other closing thoughts here or anything?
Yeah, I want to ask Chris one last question. Chris is as outdoorsman, and I keep asking people this because I genuinely want everybody's opinion. What do you think, as outdoorsmen? What do you think that we need to do to try to help promote the sport of hunting and continue to have people interested in it? You know, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think a giant challenge that we have now in this day and age with social media the way it is putting on a good face.
Yeah, I agree.
The way that social media is now, everything is at everybody's fingertips. Anything good or bad is going to happen, and what does everybody focus on? Everybody focuses on bad.
Yep.
That's what you're going to hear about.
Well, and I think there's certain things that hunters can say and talk about with other hunters that maybe the general public doesn't need to see or hear or something like that, because obviously, I mean, we're talking about the you were talking about that deer and what if you'd have lost that deer? Would we still talked about that? I don't know. I don't know if we would have or not. I mean,
I cringed even mentioning that I didn't find that deer that night. Yeah. And I mean, I almost didn't mention it. But the assumptions that folks that are listening to this know darn good and well what I went through that night, and that just does happen. If you're going to hunt day in, day out for years, you're going to make a bad hit on a deer. We need to talk about that kind of stuff amongst ourselves and try to keep it from happening. But there are a select few folks, actually, I shouldn't say a select few, there's a majority of folks that we don't need to be willingly sharing that kind of information.
I agree.
It's not that we are trying to withdraw information from people. It's just you got to constantly be thinking about who's listening in. Put yourself in their shoes. Kind of try to think about what their past experience is and where their stance is on some of these outdoor-related type items. Just where their education level is. Put yourself in their shoes and determine from that knowledge how you're going to proceed with a conversation or how you're going to proceed with a Facebook post. We've got to uphold an image, and it's got to be a pure, straightforward, really and truthfully needs to be a perfect image. Because if it's not perfect, I keep saying they, like we have an enemy. Which I mean,
which we do in some
regards.
In some regards, but then I think we also have there's a larger population of people that are indifferent, and we want to be seen as positive in their eyes.
That's exactly right. So. We need to. I mean, you asked what kind of things we can be doing. I mean, putting info on Facebook and or other social media outlets of what you're doing for wildlife.
Yeah.
Showing them how much time we spend doing food plots, building habitat, actually helping the critters.
Yeah,
I mean, sportsmen, hands down, spend more dollars
and time.
Yep. On habitat than the non-outdoorsman. It's a fact.
Yep.
So we need to
focus more on that. Yeah.
Need to make that well known.
Yeah. And I want to talk to you more, on another podcast. I want us to kind of talk about the habitat restoration and stuff that you guys are doing.
Right, we can do that.
At your dad's place, and some of the habitat stuff you guys have done at your lease and different stuff like that. I always find that as a fun topic and has some information for us all to learn from and things that maybe we can do. And I know like you guys worked with the ag office, and we're able to get some grants and things like that to help fund some of the project and stuff that everybody has an opportunity to do. Yeah, so we might dig into that a little bit more in depth on another podcast to come.
Yeah, but definitely outdoorsmen out there for sure. Always try to put yourself in that other person's shoes. Try to get their stance. Try to understand their stance and where they are, and then proceed accordingly.
Yeah, All right. Well, Chris, can't thank you enough, dude. I think this was an awesome podcast. Really enjoyed talking to you as always. We're normally talking without microphones on, so we have these conversations quite a bit. But I'm glad that we got to share it with everybody else because I think people can learn a heck of a lot from you about being an outdoorsman, about being a person, and just a better hunter in general. So thanks a lot, man.
Yes, sir.